ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। सूत उवाच युधिष्ठिरः तदाकर्ण्य शयानं शरपञ्जरे अपृच्छद्विविधान् धर्मान् ऋषीणां च अनुशृण्वताम्।
Sutta Goswami said, Maharaj Yudhishthir, after hearing Bhishmadev speak in that appealing tone, asked him, in the presence of all the great rishis, about the essential principles of various religious duties.
पुरुषस्वभावा विहितान् यथा वर्णं यथाश्रमं वैराग्यरागौपादिभ्याम् आम्नातो वयलक्षणान्।
At Maharaj Yudhishthir's inquiry, Bhishmadev first defined all the classifications of castes and orders of life in terms of the individual's qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold divisions, described counteractions by detachment and interaction by attachment.
दान धर्मान् राजधर्मान् मोक्षधर्मान् विभागशः स्त्रीधर्मान् भगवद्धर्मान् समासव्यासायोगतः।
He then explained by divisions acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees, both briefly and extensively.
धर्मार्थकाममोक्षांश सहोपायान् यथा मुने नानाख्यान् इतिहासेषु वर्णयामास तत्त्ववेत्।
Then he described the occupational duties of different orders and statuses of life, citing instances from history, for he was himself well acquainted with the truth.
धर्मं प्रवदः तस्य सकालः प्रति उपस्थितः यो योगिन चन्दनमृच्छो वाञ्छितः उत्तरायणः।
While Bhishmadev was describing occupational duties, the sun's course ran into the northern hemisphere. This period is desired by mystics who die at their will.
ततोपसंहृत्य गिरः सहस्रणीः विमुक्तसङ्गं मनादिपुरुषे कृष्णे लसत्पीतपटे चतुर्भुजे पुरस्थिते अमीलितदृग्व्यधारयत्।
Thereupon, that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings and who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men stopped speaking and being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide open eyes upon the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who stood before him, four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined.
विशुद्धया धारणया हताशुभः तदीक्षयैवाशु गतायुधश्रमः निवृत्त सर्वेन्द्रियवृत्तिविभ्रमः तुष्टावजन्यं विसृजन् जनार्दनम्।
By pure meditation, looking at Lord Sri Krishna, he at once was freed from all material inauspiciousness and was relieved of all bodily pains caused by the arrow wounds. Thus, all the external activities of his senses at once stopped, and he prayed transcendently to the controller of all living beings while quitting his material body.
Shri Bhishma Uvacha इति मतिरुपकल्पिता वितृष्णा भगवती सात्वतपुङ्गवे विभूम्नि स्वसुखमुपगते क्वचिद् विहत्तुं प्रकृतिमुपेशि यद्भवप्रवाहः।
Bhishmadev said, "Let me now invest my thinking, feeling, and willing, which were so long engaged in different subjects and occupational duties, in the all-powerful Lord Krishna. He is always self-satisfied, but sometimes, being the leader of the devotees, he enjoys transcendental pleasure by descending on the material world. although from him only the material world is created.
त्रिभुवनकमनं तमालवर्णं रविकरगौरवराम्बरं दधाने वपुरलककुलवृतनाभ्यं विजयसखेरतिरस्तुमेन वध्य.
Sri Krishna is the intimate friend of Arjuna. He has appeared on this earth in his transcendental body, which resembles the bluish color of the Tamala tree. His body attracts everyone in 3 planetary systems, upper, middle, lower. May his glittering yellow dress and his lotus face, covered with paintings of sandalwood pulp, be the object of my attraction, and may I not desire fruitive results.
युदितुरगरजो विदुम्रविश्वक् कचलुलितश्रमवारिलङ्कृतास्ये मम निशितसिरिद्विविध्यमान त्वचि विलसत्कवचेस्तु कृष्णात्मा.
On the battlefield where Sri Krishna attended Arjuna out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by the hoofs of the horses. And because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go unto Sri Krishna.
सपदि सखि वचो निशम्य मध्ये निजपरयोर्भलयोरतं निवेश्य सितवति परशनैकुः अक्ष्ण कृतवति पार्दसखेरतिर्ममास्तु.
In obedience to the command of his friend, Lord Shri Krishna entered the arena of the battlefield of Kurukshetra between the soldiers of Arjuna and Duryodhana. And while there, he shortened the lifespan of the opposite party by his merciful glance. This was done simply by his looking at the enemy. Let my mind be fixed upon that Krishna.
व्यवहितकृष्णामुखं निरीक्ष्य स्वजनवदद्विमुखस्य दोषबुद्ध्या कुमति महददात्मविद्यायः जनरतिः परमस्य तस्य मेस्तु.
When Arjuna was seemingly polluted by ignorance upon observing the soldiers and commanders before him on the battlefield, the Lord eradicated his ignorance by delivering transcendental knowledge. May his lotus feet always remain the object of my attraction.
स्वनिगमम् अपहायमत्रिघ्नं वृतमधिकत्वप्लुतो रतस्तः द्रुतरथचरणोऽभ्याचलद्गुः हरिरिव हन्तुमिवं गतोत्तरेयः.
Fulfilling my desire and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up its wheel, and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garment on the way.
सितविसिकहतो विशीर्णदंशः क्षतज परिप्लुतादितायनो मे प्रसृपमपि ससरमद्भदार्थं स भवतु मे भगवान् गतिर्मुकुन्दः.
May he, Lord Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. On the battlefield, he charged me, as if angry because of the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows. His shield was shattered, and his body was smeared with blood due to the wounds.
विजयरथ कुटुम्बाततोत्रे द्रुतहयरस्मिनि तच्चेक्षणीये भगवति रतिरस्तु मे मुमूषोः यमिह निरीक्षातागताः स्वरूपम्.
At the moment of death, let my ultimate attraction be to Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. I concentrate my mind upon the chariot driver of Arjuna, who stood with a whip in his right hand and a bridle rope in his left, who was very careful to give protection to Arjuna's chariot by all means. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms after death.
ललित गति विलासवल्गुहास प्रणय निरीक्षण कल्पितो रुमाणाः कृतमनुकृतवच्युन्मदान्दाः प्रकृति मगन किलयस्य गोपवद्वः.
Let my mind be fixed upon Lord Shri Krishna, whose motions and smiles of love attracted the damsels of Brajdam, the gopis. The damsels imitated the characteristics movement of the Lord after his disappearance from the Rasa dance.
मुनिगण नृपवर्य संकुलेन्तः सदसि दुशिरराजसूय येषाम् अर्हणमुपेदीक्षणीयो मम दृशिगोचर एषा विरात्मा.
At the Raja Suya Yajna sacrifice performed by Maharaj Yudhishthir, there was the greatest assembly of all the elite men of the world, the royal and learned orders. And in that great assembly, Lord Shri Krishna was worshipped by one and all as the most exalted personality of Godhead. This happened during my presence, and I remembered the incidents in order to keep my mind upon the Lord.
तम् इमम् अहम् अजं शरीरभाजां हृदि हृदि दिष्टितमात्मकल्पितानां प्रतिदृशिमिव नैकतार्कमेकं समधिगतोऽस्मि विदूतभेदमोहः.
Now I can meditate with full concentration upon that one Lord, Sri Krishna, now present before me, because now I have transcended the misconceptions of duality in regard to his presence in everyone's heart, even in the hearts of the mental speculators. He is in everyone's heart. The sun may be perceived differently, but the sun is one.
सूत उवाच कृष्ण एवं भगवते मनोवाक् दृष्टिवृत्तिभिः आत्मनि आत्मानम् आवेश्य सोऽन्तः श्वास उपारमत्.
Sutta Goswami said, thus Bhishmadev merged himself in the Supersoul, Lord Shri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with his mind, speech, sight, and actions. And thus he became silent and his breathing stopped.
सम्पद्यमानमाज्ञाय भीष्मं ब्रह्मणि निष्कले सर्वे भवौस्ते तूष्णीं वयांसीव दिनाच्चये.
Knowing that Bhishmadev had merged into the unlimited eternity of the Supreme Absolute, all present there became silent like birds at the end of the day.
तत्र दुन्दुभयो नेदुः देवमानववादिताः शशंसुः साधवो राज्ञं कात्पेतुः पुष्पवृष्टयः.
Thereafter, both men and demigods sounded drums in honor, and the honest royal order commenced demonstrations of honor and respect, and from the sky fell showers of flowers.
तस्य निर्हरणादीनि सम्परेतस्य भार्गवं युधिष्ठिरः कारयित्वा मुहूर्तं दुःखितो अभवत्.
O descendant of Bhrigu, Sunaka, after performing funeral rituals for the dead body of Bhishmadev, Maharaj Yudhishthir was momentarily overtaken with grief.
तुष्टुः मुनयो हृष्टाः कृष्णं तद्गुह्य नामभिः ततस्ते कृष्णहृदयाः स्व आश्रमान् प्रययुः पुनः.
All the great sages then glorified Lord Shri Krishna, who was present there, by confidential Vedic hymns. Then all of them returned to their respective hermitages, bearing always Lord Krishna within their hearts.
ततो युधिष्ठिरो गत्वा सह कृष्णो गजाह्वयं पितरं स्वान्तयामास गान्धारीं च तपस्विनीम्.
Thereafter, Maharaj Yudhishthir at once went to his capital, Hastinapur, accompanied by Lord Shri Krishna, and there he consoled his uncle and aunt Gandhari, who was an ascetic.
पित्रा च अनुमतो राजा वासुदेव अनुमोदितः चकार राज्यं धर्मेण पितृपैतामहं विभुः.
After this, the great religious king, Maharaj Yudhishthir, executed the royal power in the kingdom strictly according to the codes and royal principles approved by his uncle and confirmed by Lord Shri Krishna. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the first canto, 9th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Passing Away of Bhishmadev in the Presence of Lord Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, before we start today's class, let's just meditate on the Supreme Lord. So, Lord Krishna is the supreme cause of all causes. Meditating on his lotus feet, it's the ultimate shelter, and it's only the only sane conclusion. The Lord is the cause of all causes, and he exists before, during, and after annihilation. The Lord exists in everything, everywhere, and in everyone. And to see any situation without the Lord's presence is illusion. And one must search for him, which is the ultimate goal for all of us, to be able to realize the Lord in every situation, in every person, in everything. The Lord's feet are like mountains that shatter the sins in our heart. Irreligion, falsity, bluffing, cheating, lying, lust, anger, greed, envy, hypocrisy, quarreling, harsh speech, fear, doubt, anger, suffering, and pain. The Lord's lotus feet is like the beautiful showers of the Lord of Gangaji. The Ganga cleanses and purifies us. The Lord's lotus feet is the source of all knowledge and remembrance and forgetfulness, that we pray that we can always remember the Lord, like Grandfather Bhishma, that he gives us the understanding by which to come to him and to never forget him. And the Lord's feet are the rays of sunshine, that the Lord's love is unconditional for us, and he never chooses who he wants to give his mercy, because his mercy is unconditionally for everyone. And just like the sun that never says you owe me, the Lord's mercy is like that. And such is the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam, because it's the Lord himself who has appeared. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the crux where Maharaj Yudhishthira is about to ask Bhishma Dev about some essential principles and the various duties. And on his deathbed, Bhishma Dev is instructing about Varnashram Dharma. So just to get us to sort of the gist of everything, Maharaj Yudhishthira, he goes with his younger brothers and Lord Krishna in an opulent procession on the battlefield, where Bhishma is lying on the on the bed of arrows. And funny enough, just a few months ago, I had the privilege with other devotees to visit Kurukshetra, and the place where Bhishma was lying on the bed of arrows, and where he asked Arjun, no more wanting to take any water or anything, any dependency on Duryodhan or that side of the family. He didn't want to be implicated with them anymore. He asks Arjun to fire an arrow in which he calls for his mother Ganga, and not only is his thirst quenched, but he asks for his mother to take him back. So I think a key essential principle for us to understand is that the Lord wanted the Pandavas to be in the presence of Bhishma Dev at the time of his death. Now, when somebody is lying on a bed of so many arrows at the time of death, and they're in pain, it's the last thing they want to do is to be able to have a instruction or conversation. But actually, the Lord instructed Maharaj Yudhishthira in particular to come to grandfather Bhishma, because he knew that he was the only person that Yudhishthira Maharaj would actually listen to and take instruction from him. But also it was to give Bhishma Dev joy and pleasure to see the Pandavas, that they were finally going to be rightly established in their kingdom as the rightful pious rulers. Now, Bhishma Dev begins to explain a little bit about suffering, and he, he's feeling very bad, and he's saying to the Pandavas, you're suffering, you suffered because of injustice. And he said that sometimes we're all destined to suffer by providence, and Kunti, in some way, she doubly suffered, but in this situation, it's to help us understand how devotees tolerate without being disturbed. The Lord also instructs Yudhishthira and the Pandavas that everything is controlled by time, so one has to bear the actions and reactions within a certain time frame. However, the distinction between a devotee who has complete faith in the Lord is that no matter what they go through, where they feel completely alone, abandoned, isolated, the faithful devotee always remains in full faith of the Lord. So, Grandfather Bhishma is saying, don't be tricked by, the tricks of time. One should not hold any grudge, because ultimately, everything starts and ends with time. So despite the Pandavas having the power of pious activities, the power of being great personalities, the power of expert management, the power of weapons, and they were under this direct supervision of the Lord, they still suffered practical reverses. And this can only be explained, ladies and gentlemen, that it's almost like the Lord uses his devotee to set an example of how, even nobody is exempt from suffering, but here there's a glorification of how a devotee deals with difficulties. Now, if we look at verse 25, 26, and 27 today, Maharaj Yudhishthira now is feeling really abandoned. He's feeling really alone because, of course, the grandsire was there and he was the person that they could always go to and rely upon. So he's now asking, please, instruct, impart essential principles, and of course, various religious duties. The Lord wants to also prove to us, to the Pandavas, that when a Lord's devotee like Bhishma Dev is on the bed of arrows, it also explains that he's of sound mind, and even though his body might be in pain, he's actually quite sound in his body and mind because of his spiritual enlightenment. So that's one thing that we always have to bear in mind, that yes, Maharaj Yudhishthira is asking these questions, but when you look at this situation, and particularly even in the situation of Srila Prabhupada passing, even till his last breath, he was preaching. And this is something that Grandfather Bhishma is now about to do. So in any situation, one thing we have to learn from Grandfather Bhishma is that, he, because he's a pure devotee, he's in perfect order to be able to speak the right way. And of course, it establishes his glories. And then I think let's go into some of the key things that Srila Prabhupada is saying in this purport. So in purport 25, one of the key things, as I've just covered, is Srila Prabhupada wants us to understand that the pure devotee is always in sound body and mind because of their spiritual enlightenment. And of course, ultimately, that's the final test, isn't it, for all of us, that however we are bungling through life, it is actually the mercy of the devotee and the strength of the mercy of other devotees, the mercy of the Lord, but the strength of the devotee that enables them to be, no matter what, however the pain they're suffering. And of course, they say death also brings a lot of pain. The devotee has the ability to overcome pain, and in a sane state of mind. In verse 26, Maharaj, Yudhishthira's inquiry is now being really defined. And, you know, I suppose the key thing that Srila Prabhupada wants us to know about Varnashram Dharma is that, you know, our human realization is distinguished from animals. They mate, fear, all of these things. But look, Grandfather Bhishma is advising us that all human beings must have 9 qualifications. The first qualification is not to become angry, not to lie, to be equally, you know, to be equally distribute one's wealth, to forgive, to beget children only by one's legitimate wife, to be pure in mind and hygienic in body, not to be inimical towards anyone, to be simple, to support servants or subordinates. And one cannot be called, Prabhupada says, a civilized person without acquiring the above mentioned preliminary qualities. So for just a moment, I just want all of us to just take a breath and, you know, just look at these 9 qualifications to be a human being, yeah, beyond the animal consciousness. So the first one is, you know, can I control my anger? And of course, anger comes from attachment, frustration, lamentation. It's, you know, being attached to a certain outcome. So, you know, we have to question ourselves, you know, have I been able to overcome anger, or do I get slighted very quickly and I react? You know, ask ourselves, do we ever lie? Do we equally distribute our wealth? Fourth one, are we forgiving? Or is there somebody we're still holding grudge against? Or is there, you know, somebody in the past that who we feel, you know, that they've hurt us and it's very, very difficult to forgive? I mean, it's quite interesting that it's not just a human level of life, but actually if we want to advance spiritually, one of the key things is, you know, forgiveness is a divine act. So we have to ask ourselves and say, you know, is there someone I need to go away and forgive? So that's something to check in. Again, to beget children out of only from one's legitimate wife, to be pure in mind and hygienic in body. So it's said that, you know, grihasthas shower twice a day. Brahmanas, Vaishnavas, sannyasis, they shower 3 times a day. And that's really that, you know, as we are going about in the day, there are subtle energetic influences, all sorts of things that, you know, can affect our psychology, our mind, can be influenced. So again, you know, Grandfather Bhishma is saying this is a really important aspect for us to be clean, not just in mind and body. And of course, you know, I suppose we have to check in with our own mind, what cleanliness of mind means what. What kind of thoughts am I thinking? Is it I'm thinking bad thoughts? Am I thinking good thoughts? Because even, that is, even good thoughts in itself is not enough, because a pure devotee is always thinking about, how do I see the Lord in this situation? How do I see the Lord's hand in this? And in every moment, can I see the Lord in everyone, in everything, and everywhere? Then looking at not to be inimical towards anyone. Do we harbor hate or anger or resentment to somebody? Do we sometimes think, yeah, if they suffered, I wouldn't be too bothered because they made me suffer. To be simple. So, I mean, just think about, are there aspects in your life that can enable you to become more simple in your thoughts, in your living, in our interactions? And then the ninth one is to support servants and subordinates. So again, in Krishna consciousness, we're always compassionate to those who are junior to us. So here, it's really about helping others and elevating them and supporting them. So rather than chastising them or putting them down, how do we look after and treat others who we may think are more junior than us? So Srila Prabhupada is saying that unless we can, be perfect, have some kind of perfection in those 9 areas, we can't be called a civilized person. So, I just look at these and I think the first one, not to become angry, I think, well, definitely something that I personally probably would want to work on. I don't know about some of you, so if there are any that you want to work on, just fire away. But I'm sure anger, forgiveness, not to be inimical towards anyone, simple. These are all Brahmanical qualities that, like Srila Prabhupada says, that the Krishna Consciousness Society is about creating Brahmanas, because the Brahmanas are the brain of the society. And unfortunately, society doesn't have a brain right now. So Srila Prabhupada's whole intention is that in line with Grandfather Bhishma's instructions, that we begin to develop these qualities so that ultimately Krishna consciousness is a preaching mission, so that we can help others come to Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada says that he mustn't do these things which are forbidden in the Shastras. A person cannot be a teacher if he drinks and smokes. And in the modern education system, teachers' academic qualification is taken into consideration without evaluation of his moral life. So that's a very interesting point, isn't it? That, therefore, the result of education is misuse of high intelligence in so many ways. So here in the Vedic tradition, it's very clear that if you're, I was watching something and said that, sometimes devotees preach, but they don't practice, or they practice, but they don't preach. So this is what Srila Prabhupada is saying, that, if there's an incongruency between, let's say I'm a teacher, and I have these wonderful academic qualifications, but I have a very poor moral life, well, that's not going to have any Shakti. And it's interesting that, the whole education system is set up on creating workers, basically, English, reading, writing, maths, all of these things. And so children are inculcated with those kind of subjects. But what about the most important education? Who am I? Why am I here? I'm a spirit soul. why is it that the education system doesn't even cover that? And that's really baffling. So we can see that even within society, that unless we support our children, grandchildren in understanding that they're a spirit soul, the education system isn't going to do that. So what does it do? It produces children and adults who think that their only value and worth is by the academic qualification that they have. Doesn't matter about anything else. It doesn't matter about morals or values, but it's ultimately it's about the, the statistics that a school can achieve, but it's also the grades that a child. So the values are misplaced. So Srila Prabhupada is telling us that, I think I think it's more of an instruction for us as devotees, because ultimately all devotees are, if we're in a preaching mission, we are some kind of teacher in one way or another. So by looking at these 9 areas, we have to, it's a checklist for us that, how am I checking in with myself? Because if I'm preaching this, and I'm telling people follow the 4 regulative principles, read, chant, have faith in Krishna, but I don't have any of those qualities or that faith, then that in itself is incongruent. Srila Prabhupada describes that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Krishnadas Kaviraj says it's like almost garlanding a dead body. It's saying I'm devotional, but actually there's no devotion. It's sort of, it's more external than internal. So Srila Prabhupada says that administrators should never pretend to become non-violent, therefore thereby go to hell. So that's another instruction here that, according to one's vanashram, there's a place for violence. There's also a place for anger, because ultimately in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord is inciting anger in Arjuna to fight. So anger can also be a spiritual quality, but certainly we shouldn't use it as an excuse to get angry and think, well, okay, I will use it here. Prabhupada says when Arjuna wanted to be a non-violent coward on the battlefield, he was severely chastised by the Lord. The Lord degraded Arjuna at that time to the status of an uncivilized man. So, there's a time and a place. And here the administrative class have to be educated on military education. It's interesting because in my university at Oxford, they give scholarships and fellowships to teachers, but also those in the military, because those who are in the military, and they say that, the British, the training and compared to like maybe even the American, there's a whole level of ethics and morals in terms of warfare. But we know that in even in the Mahabharata, where Ashwatthama, he violates that and goes and kills the sons of the grandchildren of Queen Kunti. So Prabhupada just talks about, so the other thing is that in this Srila Prabhupada also talks about, the different communities where there are mercantile communities, those who protect cows. So one of the important things about which part of who you belong to, whether you're Vaishnava, Sudra, Brahmana, or a Kshatriya, that they're not. This is not something that you're actually born into, but it's about based on your quality. And this is a very fundamental teaching of Krishna consciousness, that we are not a tradition that stipulates right, you're born in a family of Kshatriyas, so therefore you must all be Kshatriya. No, it's really like when Brahma created his children, he created he created Manu, but from Manu came different types of children. One son was a Brahmana, one was a Kshatriya, one was a Shudra. So we can see that even within our own families, we need to be able to look at our qualities and then engage them in Krishna consciousness. So it's an interesting thing because Prabhupada says that in terms of instructing, a Sudra should never leave his master when the master is old or invalid. So this is something about also taking care of people who work for us, taking care of being able to understand the psychology of people who are in our care. I'm going to just go to the final verse, which is verse 27. And the translation is, he then explained by divisions, acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees, both briefly and extensively. So before I go into the actual purport, one of the critical things about the activities of a king is that in Canto 5, there is, there are not rules, but there are essential requirements for someone who's in leadership, and that is that they first of all that anyone under one's leadership shouldn't be hungry. The other thing is that a leader speaks kind, truthful words. So how often do we speak the truth, but it often comes out the wrong way, or we upset others. The other thing is that we don't overtax. Leaders don't overtax. They don't overwork people, so that there is that little flexibility that they can actually breathe and have some kind of space to feel and be themselves. And of course, one of the greatest examples of duty of a woman is in the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Sukanya gets married to Jaivanya Muni, and she, I don't know if any of you know this story, but it's a beautiful example of how a woman is dutiful to her husband. Her father was a king and went to see this great Muni, and he, in waiting to see the Muni, the young girl gets a stick and she notices some glowworms, so she pokes at the glowworms, and all of a sudden the glowworms begin to bleed. And then soon after, the king's army, the men, they're not able to urinate, they're experiencing great discomfort. But because the king was quite pious, he was able to understand very quickly that there's been some contamination in this ashram. Somebody has been something's gone wrong. The king could pick up through almost seeing that the disturbance of his soldiers as a bad omen. And then he soon realizes that his daughter comes up and says, well, she puts her hand up and says, oh, I'm really sorry, I got a stick and I poked these glowworms and they began to bleed. It just happens that the glowworm, the two parts of the glowworm were actually the Muni, who had because he was a mystic, he had transformed himself. So to pacify him, the king was able to give him kind words and offer his daughter as his wife. So now the king now marries off his beautiful princess daughter to an old, a very old and sort of haggard Muni. But his daughter is so exalted that despite the man, the Muni being an old man and temperamental and irritable and sometimes very ungracious, his daughter remains absolutely equiposed. And there it is explained, Srila Prabhupada explains that a woman's power is really in her ability to be able to be equiposed, not bad-tempered like her husband, but to be able to serve her husband without any complaint, or to be submissive. But he said it's not the submission in the Western standard or the Western context where we think, oh, well, the woman is a slave. But actually, Srila Prabhupada says that the duty of a woman is to be always to be able to serve her husband and put her husband forward, so that in time, like the Muni, he then calls the Ashwin Kumars to come down, because they know how to revive him, rejuvenate him. And it says that in that way, that when a wife or a woman looks after her husband, then he then pleases her and wants to please her. So Prabhupada says that's the power of a woman. The other thing about duties of women and devotees is that sometimes we misunderstand what Srila Prabhupada says, that sometimes it's said women aren't intelligent, but we know that in this context, Srila Prabhupada means that with a woman's biological wiring, that they can often be more emotional. And when we're emotional, we're not, what's the word, very measured or pragmatic about, even making decisions. So it's not that, particularly if it's devotee women, Srila Prabhupada says that in itself is exempt, because they essentially understand the role. So what is the role of a devotee woman then in that instance? Well, Srila Prabhupada, and I think sometimes we're losing this in a society where we think everything has to be about being masculine, that the role of the women, and even when you look at Srimad Bhagavatam and some of the scriptures, they're actually, you can see that in the context, they're very much designed for men, because when men are elevated and liberated in their own dealings, then they can actually take their wives back to Godhead, and the wives are there to support them mutually, collaboratively, to raise a Krishna conscious family. So this will bring up a whole load of issues about, well, what does it mean to be a woman, when a woman is, sometimes in the West, it's considered that women should be independent and they should, earn their own money and they should get on with it. But I think here we're talking about intelligent women who are Krishna conscious, and that they also understand, in whether it's in the work or the family, that they are ultimately devotees, and they're acting under the instruction and the guidance of their mentors, the devotees around them, and of course through the teachings of Bhagavatam. So one of the things in the purport that Srila Prabhupada says, to give in charity is a householder's main function, and should be prepared to give charity at least 50% of hard-earned money. So I think this also takes it for example of the 6 Goswamis, that in the I can't remember which Goswami it was, but in terms of distributing wealth, that there's a mathematical formula in terms of how wealth is distributed. And then finally, towards the end, Srila Prabhupada says that ultimately, whatever we do, whatever we undergo, whatever penance we do, whatever sacrifice we do, whatever we eat, whatever we give in charity, must be offered to the Lord. Krishna Arpanam. Sometimes some devotees will say, you know, before they do anything, you know, if they give something or they do something, Krishna Arpanam, that, you know, by saying that, they remind themselves that I'm doing it for you, my Lord. This purport then goes on to talk about Raj Dharma, how kings are, how they should be, how they should not just merely collect taxes, because of course one of the things is that when kings overtax, if they create disturbance for their citizens, then you know, they befall actually they actually incur heavy karmic reaction. So I think I'm going to just stop there and see if any, because it's 8:40, if anyone's got any questions, any comments. Okay, so on that note then, thank you, Sumatra, Radhika Masi. All right, dear devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, and taking the dust of your lotus feet. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank
Hare
you.
Krishna, Rajna.
Hare
Very
Krishna,
nice having
Mataji.
that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Mataji.
Krishna Mataji, thank you.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
મને આમ ફકીર હું ત્યાં તો કરવા જતો હતો